The wind whispered through the trees, and the small wooden cabin rested on the mountainside, bathed in the silvery light of the moon. Inside, the monk Ryokan meditated in silence, with the serenity of a calm lake. He owned little: a straw mat, a clay teapot, and a worn-out robe. But his heart was light, like a leaf floating in the river. That night, while the forest slept, a stranger broke the stillness. The door creaked open, and a shadow entered stealthily. The monk opened his eyes and saw a ragged man, his face hardened by life. "Give me everything you have," the thief whispered, holding a trembling old knife. Ryokan looked at him kindly and smiled. "Of course," he replied in a serene voice. He stood up slowly, took off his robe, and handed it to the thief with both hands. Then he stood there, his bare skin exposed to the cold caress of the night wind. The thief, confused, took the robe, unsure of what to say. "I wish I could also give you this beautiful moon," the monk said, pointing to the sky. The thief looked at the silver glow reflected in the nearby stream. Something stirred inside him. The thief tightened the robe in his hands. He didn't understand what had just happened. He had expected screams, resistance, maybe pleas, but this monk had only offered him the little he had with a peaceful smile. Silence stretched between them. The night breeze stirred the branches, and the moon, round and serene, seemed to watch them from above. "Why are you giving it to me like this?" the thief asked suspiciously. Ryokan tilted his head gently. "If you have come this far in such need, how could I deny you anything?" The thief frowned. He didn't know whether the old man was mocking him or if he was being serious. He looked at the robe, felt the warmth of the worn fabric, then turned his gaze back to the monk, who remained calm under the moonlight. "I wish I could also give you this beautiful moon," Ryokan repeated with a peaceful smile. The thief felt a shiver. He had stolen many times, but he had never felt something like this. The thief looked up at the sky without realizing it. The moon shone with a pure, unreachable light, bathing the mountain in its silent glow. "What are you talking about?" he murmured, furrowing his brow. Ryokan sat down on the mat, not concerned about his nakedness or the cold. "You have come to take what I possess, but the most beautiful thing I have cannot be stolen. This moon, its light, the peace of this night, if I could, I would give them to you." The thief felt something stir inside him. His life had been full of shadows, but he had never stopped to look at the moon. His gaze fell on the monk, who watched him tenderly, as though seeing an old friend. "Take the robe, wrap yourself up, and if you're hungry, there's some rice in the pot." The thief clenched his jaw. He had never been treated like this. Without another word, he turned on his heels and left the cabin, the robe still in his hands. Outside, the moon continued to watch him. The thief descended the rocky path, pressing the robe to his chest. The night air caressed his face, and each step felt heavier. He didn't understand why he couldn't just leave as he always had. He had stolen before, escaped without looking back. But this time, something was different. He stopped under a tree twisted by the wind and looked at the robe. It was simple, worn by the years, but still held the warmth of the monk. Why? He glanced back at the cabin one last time. Through the window, he saw the silhouette of Ryokan sitting in the gloom, still, contemplating the moon with the same peace he had shown when giving him his robe. The image imprinted on his mind like an indelible mark. The thief sighed. Without realizing it, his eyes also searched for the moon. He had never truly stopped to look at it. The thief stood under the tree, feeling the weight of the night on his shoulders. He had never felt such silence inside himself. He had always run, always fled. But now, something in the stillness of that monk had stopped him. He sat on a rock, still holding the robe. The moon was still there, shining with its soft light, indifferent to his thoughts. "I wish I could give you this beautiful moon," he murmured to himself, repeating the monk's words. Why would someone offer him the moon? Why would someone look at him without fear, without contempt, without rage? The thief closed his eyes. He felt cold, but it wasn't just on his skin. It was a deeper cold, one he had carried inside for years. That night, for the first time in a long time, he didn't rush to run away. The night wind blew softly through the trees. The thief remained seated, clutching the robe as if he had found something more than simple fabric. He remembered his childhood, the days when he had slept under bridges, when hunger had forced him to steal for the first time. He had never known kindness, only the struggle to survive. And now, an old monk had given him the little he had without hesitation, with a smile that asked for nothing in return. The thief looked up. The moon was still there, bright and unreachable. He stood up. He didn't know what to do with what he felt in his chest. But for the first time in years, he didn't want to keep running. The thief made a decision. He turned on his heels and walked back down the dirt path, feeling each step as an echo of something he still didn't understand. When he reached the cabin, he saw that the door was still open. Monk Ryokan was sitting, just as he had left him, with the same peaceful expression. Without saying anything, the thief approached and carefully laid the robe folded by the entrance. Then he stood there, awkwardly, unsure whether to speak or simply leave. Ryokan looked up and smiled. "Ah, you've returned. The night is beautiful, isn't it?" The thief swallowed. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. He simply nodded slowly. The monk pointed to an empty space beside him. "If you wish to rest for a moment, you are welcome." The thief hesitated. He looked at the moon. He looked at the monk. Then, for the first time in his life, he decided to stay. The thief sat cautiously on the ground, a short distance from the monk. He wasn't used to stillness. He had always lived in motion, fleeing, lurking, surviving. Now, however, he didn't feel the need to escape. The monk said nothing more. He simply remained silent, his gaze lost in the moon. The thief tried to do the same. His eyes followed the silver reflection over the trees, over the nearby stream, over the monk's wrinkled skin. He had never before felt the night so alive, so immense. The wind blew, cold but soft. "Gee, I don't understand," he murmured at last. "Why did you treat me this way?" Ryokan smiled gently. "Because you are no different from me." The thief furrowed his brow. "That doesn't make sense." The monk closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring the night air before speaking. "When I saw you enter my hut, I saw a man hungry, not just for food, but for something deeper. Why would I deny you what little I have?" The thief felt a lump in his throat. He didn't respond. In the sky, the moon shone serenely. The thief lowered his gaze. The monk's words slid into his mind like water in a stream, gently, without resistance. "I don't understand," he repeated softly, almost to himself. Ryokan picked up a handful of dry leaves from the ground and let them fall. The wind effortlessly swept them away. "Do you understand how the wind carries the leaves?" he asked. The thief shook his head. "It's not necessary to understand. It simply happens." The thief frowned, feeling a slight anger growing inside him. "But I have stolen. I've hurt others. Shouldn't you hate me?" The monk looked at him with the same tenderness one would look at a child who has stumbled. "If someone falls into a pit, do you shout at them for falling? Or do you offer them a hand to help them out?" The thief felt his chest tighten. He had expected fear, contempt, rejection. In his life, he had never found a hand extended to him. Silence enveloped them again. Only the moon, indifferent to everything, continued to light the night. The thief looked at the monk, seeing for the first time in a long while something beyond his own anger. Something inside him began to loosen, as if Ryokan's words had touched a part of him that had been shut for years. "No one has ever shown me compassion," he said, almost in a whisper. Ryokan smiled softly, as if he already knew. "Compassion is not given, it is received. The moon doesn't demand we look at it. It simply shines. That's how true love is. It doesn't expect anything in return." The thief closed his eyes, trying to absorb what he had just heard. He had never considered the possibility of being loved unconditionally, without having to steal or do something in return. In the distance, the call of an owl echoed through the air, breaking the silence. Nature seemed to breathe in rhythm with them. "Is this what you were looking for, then?" asked Ryokan, gazing at the stars. The thief didn't respond immediately. He looked at the moon, which now reflected in the nearby stream, bright and pure. "I think so," he finally said, in a voice softer than he expected. The monk Ryokan slowly stood up, as if every movement was an expression of peace. "The moon doesn't strive to shine, nor does the wind strive to blow. They simply are. And in their being, in their essence, they teach us everything we need to know." The thief watched him in silence, feeling a strange sense of calm that he had never experienced before. "And what should I do now?" he asked in a low voice. Ryokan looked at the starry sky, his gaze lost in the immensity. "What you already do. Just stop running, stop resisting, and allow the light of the moon, even if only for a moment, to enter your heart." The thief closed his eyes, feeling a presence inside him that began to grow. He had no definitive answers, he didn't understand everything the monk was saying, but in that instant, he felt something was transforming in him. He opened his eyes and looked at the moon once more. Something inside him calmed, as if the weight of his past began to fade, if only for a moment. "Can I stay here a little longer?" he asked in a tone almost shy. Ryokan gave him a warm smile. "Of course. The moon doesn't leave immediately. You can stay as long as you wish." The thief settled down on the ground, looking at the sky, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to move. Time passed slowly in the hut, surrounded by the whisper of the night. The thief and the monk remained silent, under the same light that bathed the landscape, like two beings in harmony with nature. The thief no longer thought about the streets he had walked, or the faces of those he had left behind. In that moment, everything seemed distant and blurred. Only the calm of the present moment mattered, the simple presence of the moon, and the soft murmur of the wind. Ryokan, as if feeling the peace unfolding around them, closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the connection with the earth, the air, the stars. "Suffering comes when we cling to the past or fear the future," he said softly, without taking his gaze from the sky. The thief looked at him, feeling that those words touched something deep inside him. In all his life, he had never stopped looking back, never stopped fearing what was to come. "But he began hesitantly. "I don't know how to let go of all that." Ryokan didn't respond immediately. He simply raised a hand toward the sky, as if inviting the thief to look with him. "The moon doesn't cling to its reflection in the water. Let what has been simply be, and let what will be come when it comes." The thief stayed silent, feeling the weight of the monk's words. The moon, immutable, continued to shine, without judging, without hurrying, simply was. The thief closed his eyes, trying to follow the monk's advice. He let go slowly of the images of his past, the dusty street where he had grown up, the desperate look of those he had deceived and hurt, images that had always been so present, like shadows that chased him. But now, sitting there under the moon, it seemed those shadows dissolved in the cool night air. Is this what it means to let go? He asked finally without opening his eyes. Ryokan nodded gently, his voice a whisper full of peace. Letting go is not forgetting nor rejecting. It is simply not clinging. It is allowing things to flow like the water in the river. The thief breathed deeply, letting those words settle in his heart. For a moment, he felt light, as if he had released a burden he hadn't even known he carried. The moon, serene and constant, continued its course in the sky, not worrying about anything, just being. "Thank you," the thief said, almost not knowing why. Ryokan smiled. "You don't have to thank me. The gift is yours, in the peace you found. The moon doesn't expect to be thanked. It simply shines." The thief looked at the moon, and for the first time he saw something more than a sphere of light in the sky. He saw a reflection of what he felt inside. Serene, vast, unshakable. The thief stayed there, silently gazing at the moon. He didn't need words. In his heart, something had changed, something he couldn't explain clearly, but which felt deeper than any understanding. The monk, as if he had read his thoughts, spoke softly. "The path to peace is not a destination, but a way of walking. There's no need to run, just walk, without hurrying, without resisting." The thief thought of all the times he had run in his life, fleeing from himself, fleeing from pain. But now, being there under the moon, he felt he could simply be. "I never thought something so simple could change me," he said softly, as if speaking to himself. Ryokan looked at him, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Simplicity is the essence of wisdom. The complicated ones get lost in illusions. The simple ones find truth in everything. The thief pondered these words. Maybe he had been searching for complex answers his whole life, looking outside of himself for what had always been within him. He looked at the nearby stream, the water flowing effortlessly, without stopping. "Can I stay here, even after tonight?" he asked, with a humility he had never shown. Ryokan gave him a calm glance and nodded. "The moon does not leave, nor does the river stop flowing. If you wish to stay, the place is yours." The thief felt a deep peace hearing those words. For the first time, he felt he belonged to something greater than himself, something that required nothing, only accepted. The thief lay down on the ground, his hands resting on the cold earth, but recognizing that this was land that asked for nothing but to simply be. He breathed deeply, letting the night air fill him, savoring the sensation of no longer having to flee. The moon was still there, shining in all its glory, like a silent, reliable, and constant friend. The thief, now free of his impulse to escape, began to understand, albeit faintly, what the monk had taught him. Monk Ryokan settled beside him, without hurry, without worry, looking at the same moon that now seemed to share with him. "Did you know the moon is not afraid of being seen?" Ryokan asked gently. The thief, though still puzzled, felt the truth in those words. He slowly sat up, looking at the reflection of the moon in the water. "No, but now that you say it, it makes sense. The moon has nothing to hide. It simply is. And we are like that if we allow it. We are what we are with no need to hide. But sometimes we spend life trying to conceal what is already there, simply because we don't understand it." The thief nodded slowly, as if the monk's words were unveiling in his mind. For the first time, he thought maybe he didn't need to run from who he had been or from what he had done. He just needed to be just as the moon was. "What if I can't leave behind what I've done?" he asked, doubt still present in his voice. Ryokan looked at him with infinite tenderness. "Let time do its work. The moon does not grieve over its reflection in the water. The water simply receives it as it is. The thief remained silent, allowing the peace of the night to envelop every corner of his being. Gradually, the weight of his past began to feel lighter, as if somehow it was no longer that important. The thief stayed there, eyes closed, absorbing the soft murmur of the night. The cold no longer bothered him. Inside, a warmth began to grow, as if the moon's light was passing through him, dissolving the remaining shadows. Ryokan's presence was calm, constant, like the moon itself, but without interfering in the thief's process. He was just there, observing, offering his silence as a kind companion. After a long while, the thief finally spoke, his voice full of an unexpected calm. "I never imagined I would find peace this way. I thought I would always have to fight for it." Ryokan smiled without haste. "Peace never needs to be fought for. It is found when we cease fighting. The moon does not strive to shine. It simply does." The thief looked at the moon, reflecting on those words. More and more, his heart seemed to be understanding the truth that the monk was sharing. Peace didn't need to be forced. It just had to be allowed to come, just as the moon comes every night. "How can I live like this?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "Live the same way you breathe," Ryokan replied. "Without effort, without fear, just being." The thief thought about that, and for a moment he felt free, not from his past deeds, but from the need to redeem them at all costs, just to be, nothing more. The thief breathed deeply, feeling how each inhalation seemed to carry a little more of his anxiety away, while each exhalation brought him closer to the peace the monk was offering so generously. For the first time in a long time, there was no urgent desire in his chest, nor a need to chase something he had yet to attain. There was only space. The moon, like a silent mirror, reflected its light without expecting anything in return, and somehow, that light was all he needed at that moment. "I've never known something so simple and so deep," the thief murmured, looking at the reflection of the moon in the clear water of the stream. Ryokan nodded, his eyes shining with the same softness as the moon itself. "Simplicity is the essence of truth. We only need to clear the noise within us to hear what is already present." The thief remained silent, contemplating those words. Everything he had believed he needed, everything he had fought to obtain, seemed insignificant now in the face of this simple truth. Peace was not something sought outside. It was always there, in the silence, in being. Suddenly, something in his heart felt light, as if the weight of years of struggle dissolved in the stillness of that night. He didn't have to do anything to deserve peace. He already had it in the same way the moon has always had it. "Can I stay here without feeling like I have to change anything?" the thief asked, almost afraid that his own question might be unnecessary. Ryokan smiled gently, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. "There is nothing to change. The moon does not change to please others. It simply is. And you are like that too." The thief nodded slowly, embracing that truth that now began to feel like his own. The thief stayed there, watching the moon, feeling a deep peace he had never experienced before. The fresh night air seemed to gently caress him, and for the first time, he felt in complete harmony with everything around him. The stars twinkled above him like little lights of hope, and the soft murmur of the stream became a comforting melody. He had never before felt that he belonged to this world in such a deep way. His whole life had been a struggle to survive, to obtain, to protect what he believed was his. But now all of that seemed so distant, so unnecessary. "I didn't know living could be so simple," he said, his voice full of wonder and gratitude. Ryokan looked at him with a gaze full of compassion. "Living is always simple. It is fear that complicates it. When we let go of fear, the simple becomes clear." The thief closed his eyes, letting those words sink into his being. Fear, that old companion who had always been by his side, no longer seemed to have the power it once had. In its place, there was stillness, a deep acceptance of what he was. He felt like the stream, flowing effortlessly, accepting whatever came without fighting against it. He didn't need to fight against his past, nor with what he thought he should be. He just had to be. "Is this what people are looking for?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. Ryokan breathed slowly, as if each inhalation was a way of absorbing the calm that reigned around them. "What we seek, we have inside of us. We just need to remember it." The thief smiled, for the first time, a genuine smile without guilt, without fear. Just a smile as natural as the moon shining in the sky. The thief felt a peace he had never thought possible. A peace that did not come from the absence of problems or from fleeing his past, but from the deep acceptance of life as it was. Each moment, though fleeting, seemed to contain everything he had always been searching for. He looked at the monk Ryokan, who was watching him with an unshakable calm, as if everything he needed to know was already revealed in his gaze. There was no judgment, no hurry, just a profound connection with the present moment. "And now what?" asked the thief, unsure of what to do with this new feeling. Ryokan answered softly, "Now simply keep being. There is no need to do anything. Like the moon which does not strive to shine, just be. Everything else will come when the time is right." The thief nodded, feeling those words settle into his heart with the same softness with which the moon reflected on the water. He didn't need to change. He didn't need to do anything to be worthy of this peace. He just needed to be. For a moment, everything seemed to be in its place. The thief stayed there, under the starry sky, without hurry, without desire. He just was. And that was enough. "Thank you," he said, in a whisper. And this time it wasn't an empty word. It was the expression of a deep gratitude, a gratitude for something he couldn't fully comprehend, but that he felt within himself. Ryokan nodded, his face illuminated by the moon. "The gift of the moon has no owner. It simply is. And now you know this." The thief smiled, feeling for the first time that it was unnecessary to search anymore. That peace was there, inside of him, waiting to be recognized. The night passed slowly, but time no longer seemed important. The moon continued its silent journey across the sky, while the thief and the monk Ryokan stayed together, watching the stillness of the world. The thief no longer felt the pressure of his past or the need to move towards some destination. Everything he needed was already there in that moment. Peace, the light of the moon, and the wisdom that arose in silence. Ryokan stood up slowly, his movements as gentle as the flow of the wind. The moon doesn't wait for dawn to rest, nor does the sun hurry to arrive. Everything has its time. Everything has its rhythm. The thief watched him, and for the first time in his life, he understood there was no hurry. There was nothing to conquer, nothing to change. Just live, be, and allow life to flow without resistance. "Should I continue my way now?" he asked, somewhat unsure, but without the urgency that had once driven him. Ryokan looked at him with a deep and serene gaze. "Your path will always be with you, even when you cannot see it. All you must do is walk with awareness, without fear and without hurry." The thief nodded, understanding that, although his path was not yet clear, it wasn't necessary to force it. He could walk in peace, without needing to search beyond what he already had inside. The monk smiled and softly moved toward the cabin, leaving the thief with the moon, the water, and the wind. The thief stayed there, looking at the moon once more, grateful for the gift that had been offered to him that night. A gift that was not a tangible object, but a new way of seeing, of feeling, and of being. And in that stillness, surrounded by the serenity of the night, The thief knew that, although his life might continue its course, he was no longer the same. He had received the gift of the moon, and that gift, deep and silent, would live in him forever.